food for thought there. I look forward to tasting those wraps a bit later on. So next we've got Leonie Martoy. She's the Business Development Manager for Kaitahi. In 2016, Leonie began a role to lead the development and implementation of a diversification strategy on behalf of her iwi, Nairaru Kaitahi. In May 2018, she and the team from Nairaru launched a new iwi food enterprise and their first product range of Kaitahi frozen superfood smoothie drops. Welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki te mana whenua o te whenua nei, ara ko te rohe pōtai o rangitāne nei rā te mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Kia tātou kua hara mai nei I tēnei ata ki te tautoko te kaupapa o te rā, tēnā koutou. Greetings to all of you. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks for the introduction, Damien. Thanks also to CEDA for inviting Kaitahi along. We're a new Indigenous food enterprise, and we're honoured to be here to share our experience. Very quickly, to give you an overview of what I'll cover, obviously I need to talk about who we are as an iwi, Ngā Roru Kitahi, but in the presentation we will move between traditional and contemporary notions, and I've arranged it this way to create an intergenerational dialogue that spans hundreds of years for primary industries to consider. The central idea that we will explore together is grounded on the belief that in a Māori worldview, humans are born as stewards, endowed with obligations and empowered at the same time to care, respect, conserve and create well-being. So Ngā Roru Kitahi, mai I te awa o Pātea ki mate aonga, mai I te mate aonga ki te kaihau a Kupe, from the mouth of Pātea River, moving inland to the mate aonga ranges, and then back to the coastline, to the mouth of Wanganui River. This is essentially where our venture is located and is situated. It's also a region that is dominated by oil, gas and dairy industries, and the most recent threat that entered into our iwi boundaries was the threat of seabed mining along our beautiful coastline. So the iwi as a collective, having seen all of this industry within our region, not wanting to say no to economic development, started on a journey to understand what would our contribution to economic development in the region be. And I guess to talk about the future of food, it's important for us to actually have a quick look at our past. And I chose this image to highlight a long history of agriculture practice by te iwi Māori throughout Aotearoa. And I think what this image also highlights is our ability to adapt in an ever-changing and complex world. The work undertaken by te iwi Māori to ensure a year-round food supply was organised, it was structured, and it was managed sustainably. Our chiefs, our rangatira, were obliged to serve the collective good of their people and their land, so they successfully managed and protected their food and economic resources. All of this activity was supported by their ability to create and foster good relationships. So this image was drawn in 1845. It shows innovation and how quickly Māori adopted their food sources that were introduced by the European settler population. So as these ships were entering and coming onto our shores, we saw that the European population had a taste for potatoes and had a taste for bread. We adapted our tikanga, our ways of growing and ways of doing things, in order to feed these people who were arriving on our shores. And that is something important to take on board, because the ways in which we went about operating and managing these new crops as a commercial enterprise did not mimic those ways of Pākehā. Like other aspects of Māori life, they followed customary patterns that had evolved over ages. And it is these customary patterns and practices that we reflect on at Kaitahi as we, in this present day, look at the new trends, the current trends off our shores and globally, so that we can bring our food to the world in the same way that our ancestors did. During the time when the threat of seabed mining came into our region, the iwi gathered together, and it was actually through the leadership of our General Manager, Anne-Marie Broughton, who's here at the back today, and collaboration with Massey University and some of our knowledgeable iwi members came together and developed our own model of entrepreneurship, Te Kawa o Māui. Our model reflects a unique Māori principle of economic development, a philosophy that doesn't focus on economic growth alone, but rather places energy on our views of vitalism, humanism, and reciprocity in order to enjoy and preserve the bounties of papatūānuku. Papatūānuku, to Ngā Rauru, is referred to te u o te ao, or the great nurturer of the world. So this idea of actually placing our energy across these realms of importance that reflect vitalism, humanism, and reciprocity in order to enjoy and preserve the bounties that Papatūānuku produces for us is an Indigenous value creation, and is looking at value creation through an Indigenous lens. Very quickly, this is a massive shift in paradigms from the current dominant thinking, which believes that the objectives of business is to generate profit for its shareholders. It's this approach that creates a dissociation from the ethical and social responsibilities that I believe has contributed greatly to the current crisis of sustainability that we're all talking about here today and have been talking about for a long time. For us at Kaitahi, by anchoring ourselves in an Indigenous Māori understanding of worldviews and considering a new view of the world, we can see how the role of culture, application of cultural values, can radically change the purpose of primary industry and add value to the notion of sustainability in business. So Kaitahi is in the business of reconstructing sustainable food systems, and the images that you can see on this slide are from the work that we have done with our people back at Ngā Rauru Kitahi Rohe. The image here, I can use this, is from Te Aroha Marae, which is one of the marae we started to work with. Here we have a group of our people tending to kawakawa that was gathered nearby. And in this experience, we have people sharing dialogue and talking across generations about the way in which kawakawa was used. The gentleman on the right is harvesting puha that we had started to trial growth of within our nursery partner. So the iwi has had a native plant nursery in operation for close to nearly 16 years now, and we are leveraging off that infrastructure to be able to grow native plants for food. I think it's really important to acknowledge the benefits of a resource derived by Indigenous peoples applying embedded cultural practice, which is indeed what we do. We have a team of nurserymen who go out and gather kawakawa for us. It's a key ingredient in our superfood smoothie. And the induction of that training for them to go out and gather safely included cultural grounding and understanding of the realm they are about to enter into the forest, and acknowledging the atua of that realm or the guardian of that realm before they start gathering. So many of our ingredients, many of our native plant food ingredients, we are exploring and revitalising ancient practices alongside of the knowledge of agronomy and horticulture as well. In this picture you can see this is an image of the native puha species, Sonchus kirkii, and this is a species of puha that once grew prolifically along our coastline. You don't see it as often today because of introduced English and Scottish species of puha, but we know and understand that this particular plant has relevance within our iwi, so we are moving toward creating opportunities to transform it. And that is essentially the industry of kaitahi, which is to transform our native plant foods into healthy foods and beverages for everybody to enjoy. Our kaitahi frozen superfood smoothie drops are just the first product offering that we have released into market. We launched last year in 2018 across a campaign of food shows, and in July last year we took out the Fine Food Innovation Award, and that innovation acknowledged the use of our native plant foods that were created and curated through traditional practice, but it also acknowledged the innovative droplet format that we transformed these blends into. It's innovative because when you are ready for your smoothie fix in the morning, all you have to do is add water or add liquid to our frozen superfood smoothie drops, and instantly you will have a delicious functional beverage. So we believe we are the first to market with the no blender, no fuss smoothie. I did have some detail around our value chain. Basically every part of our supply chain, we are looking at the opportunities to create well-being for our people and the land at the same time. But I will finish up very quickly because I know 10 minutes is up. If you would like to follow our journey, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and of course our website is there. The team at Cedar and the Event Centre have our product on offer. Some of you may have had that during the morning tea break. We hope you enjoy it, and we're happy to share more with you over the day. Ngā mihi nui.
Yes. Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm particularly interested in the iwi entrepreneur model, which is obviously founded on some very forthright but true Indigenous value sets, and I think that's a really interesting topic for me around entrepreneurship. Final speaker for this part of the day is Rob Ward. Rob is the founder of the Grocery Accelerator in London. Rob, being our international keynote speaker for the week, built one of the largest fruit businesses in the UK, supplying national supermarkets such as Marks & Spencer's, Tesco's, Asda and Waitrose. He's the founder and current director of the Grocery Accelerator, which helps food and drink companies to grow through business advice and investment, and is, as I've said before, the New Zealand Agri-Food Week's international keynote speaker.
Thank you, Damien. Wow, what a terrific bunch of people. I've got a lot to do, apparently, so I'm not very much time. So, bit of interaction here. Can anybody that's 18 or under stand up, please? Come on, up you get. Very good. Now, any of you guys plan to go shopping for clothes today? Sit down, if you are. Okay, great. There's 2 at the back, 3 at the back. Excellent. Now, sit down, please, if you plan not to eat today. Great, that's a good start. The last question is, wave your arms in the air if you don't know what you're going to eat this evening. You know what you eat this evening? Do you? Okay, great. Okay, sit down. Thanks for that quick participation. But what we're talking about really is that the difference between waving your arms in the air and actually knowing what you're going to eat is what the food business is all about. And when I was your age, my grandfather, who was born in 1903, he was a phenomenal farmer, left school at 14. I'm not suggesting that to the teachers, by the way. But he left school at 14 and went to be a farmer. He was the second son, so he wasn't given a farm. He had to go and tenant. And he learnt the hard way, but he was a real star in the Second World War, and he helped us stop starving by working with the War Rag, which is the government team that helped other farmers be good farmers. And boy, doesn't that make Brexit feel inadequately important when you think about that. But this bit is the most important part, you know, knowing what you're going to eat. We all get hungry every day if we don't eat. We don't need to buy clothes every day. And when I was your age, that's what I thought about. And my grandfather said that to me. Look, if you want to be in the business that you need to eat it every day, you need to do something every day, you need to buy something every day, that's a good business to be in. And that's why I'm still doing this business today, some years later. Eating is an agricultural act. As Wendell Berry's a philosopher and a farmer from the States, really interesting guy. Get a chance to read up about that sort of thing when you can do. But the point is that when you eat, you are then determining an agricultural act, not the other way around. And we talked about this last night at the launch of this week. But this is a really simple but fundamental point. And actually, the business of food is all about who's going to eat what. This is my first agricultural act. It's been discussed. It's a slightly embarrassing picture of myself, obviously not that long ago. But I love the food business, and it's so fascinating. I love the puzzle. And one of the reasons why I'm attracted to the industry, and I hope you, next generation, will continue to do that, is the puzzle of what we're going to eat. I love that challenge. That's what really excites me. So I've done many things, but the last business I started 5 years ago was the world's first food and drink business accelerator. And it's been a phenomenal journey. And we have lots of very young people that I've spotted and invested in. And yes, they are very different to perhaps the old school like some of us are. But you know what? We're all individuals. And maybe that's all part of the way we're going now, is that we think of us as individuals rather than maybe part of a group of any one thing. Certainly I'm not any one type. I like to be in the morning perhaps a bit of a baby boomer, and by the evening I want to be a millennial, but who knows, that's just slightly overambitious. So, however, businesses is not solved with the problems that you have around your business from which the world they are created. This is Einstein. He was bang on there, and what we did is think about how do you solve your problems within your market. You've all got opportunities. The innovations around you are like ghosts. You can't see them unless you turn on some form of way of understanding and thinking about the secret world that is around innovations. It is not something that will fall into your lap. You have to physically go out and start to connect with it. And the best way to do that is to go out of where you are and look back at where you are in your marketplace, whatever you're looking at. And interestingly, some of the best startups that are now household names in the world all started like this. And interestingly, more interesting, they started from their garages. They didn't have much money. And they actually just had great ideas and great people, which is what you can be. It doesn't have to be about massive factories or massive resources. It actually can be very humble. And this is how a lot of these people started. And we believe in our business that the startup thinking, culturally, is something that should continue forever. There's a great book called Lean Startup. AgResearch, he really pioneered the whole vocabulary around this, and now is starting to introduce startup thinking into big corporations. And so that means that being startup is not just cool at the beginning, it can be forever cool, right? So we use tech startups to inspire my business. That's not what you have to do, but it certainly works. And Seedcamp was one of the first that I got involved with back in 2011. And it was really interesting. They're a tech business. They find business, and they're one of the most successful tech accelerators in the world. And it's incredibly interesting business. They found a number of billion valuation businesses now that exist that started from absolutely zero. But I used their thinking to then create the business that I then developed. And frankly, it's about changing the odds. It's a bit of a passion for mine. Being British, we like to be the underdogs. And I think actually I'm getting to learn that the tall poppy, I've never heard of this, tall poppy kiwi likes to play down how good they really are. And, but we do need to change the odds in our marketplaces as a small, early-stage business, because the odds are pretty awful. But you can do that, and you can do that by being part of something. We call it accelerator. I'm sure that word will evolve and change. When I first introduced the word accelerator to the food industry, they thought I was trying to sell cars to them. It was pretty hard going. So what is an accelerator is a range of different things, and I'll quickly zip these up. But it's very important that they all come together. Industry know-how, people that know what they're doing. So some of these older guys aren't so bad, yeah? But we need the energy. We need funding. But that funding doesn't have to be in equity. It could be a whole range of doing that. And it could be your self-funding, but a mixture. But you've got to have some resources, but you've got to look after it like a precious piece of oxygen in your mouth, not something like change that you can throw around. But then mentoring is crucial from a good mentor. A mentor doesn't tell you what to do. It enables you to do what you need to do for yourself. Peer group network, this has been one of the most powerful things. And in London, we've got a boom of startups that are coming through. And that's because of the peer group network. It is cool to be in a food and drink business. It is very exciting. And then part of that, what we call is the family. And we look out for each other. And that's very modern. That's a very different way of thinking about suddenly competing and worrying about you're going to pinch ideas. Actually, you help each other to do more. You help each other up. I've been delighted to be part of the Cedars business this week because they do exactly that. They do that internally with their business within the people that are there, and they do that to the people that are around them. And it's a very exciting attitude that is very fresh and new. So congratulations to those guys. And collaborative trading. This is interesting. How can you buy things as a group? My strawberry business, we created a grower group, and we started to buy together and sell together, which meant we could constantly get marginal gains in costs and collaborative and power as a selling organization. That is something we don't talk enough about in this part of the world, whether it's packaging or by its supply chain. And one of the things we've done is to do that. When you start to do that, you can cut through and beat the odds, which is what it's all about. Do they work? Well, sometimes. We haven't had a failure yet, but it's been a lot of fun on the journey. But what is core to food marketing? We could talk about dozens of trends that exist today, dozens. But one of the most simplest one is food culture. There's some wonderful stories there about the indigenous food culture. And it's the same, there's indigenous food culture all over the world. And there's indigenous culture within your own culture. Interestingly, New Zealand and Britain isn't really famous for food, forgive the indigenous food, but you wouldn't know what that is other than the stereotypes. And that actually is a real liberator. You know, I feel sorry for the French. They've got to keep sticking to their French food. You don't go to Paris for a great Thai restaurant, but you could do here or London. And that means we're very diverse and multicultural. That's really exciting, and that's how great ideas come, by crossing things over. But food culture is one thing, has now turned into cultured food. And by that I mean it's become cool to be in the food business because it's a sign of intelligence. And it's not arrogance, that intelligence. It's simply knowing what you're doing, thinking about what you're doing, and being part of that. And then starting to share that with others. And I think that's a really exciting part for the future. But one of the biggest problems of business is that people try to race on too quickly. It's something we talked about a lot in the last couple of days. You know what? Just find one customer. And that could be anybody. Go to a farmer's market. Just find one customer and then see whether they like your product. But a customer is only a customer when they keep buying from you. A customer that buys once and doesn't come back is not a customer. And the most expensive thing you'll ever do is to find another customer. There's a simple number here, and it does seem a bit mathematical, but bear with me, it sort of works. Often people talk about growth curves as a sort of straightforward exponential curve or a hockey stick or whatever you want to call it. It isn't real. That's not what happens. What really happens is this. It's like a runway, and as those steps of each time you sell, you're still flatlining. It's like if you like, a rocket going along a runway and then taking off at the end. But all the hard work is at the very beginning where there's no real volume. But that's where you learn about what works and doesn't work. You must not scale your business until you've got enough customers that are repeat buying. Understanding that is the crucial thing. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 is the way it works. Those people that keep rebuying are what you're talking to. Do not race to the bottom and try and get the big numbers because the spreadsheet says that's profitable. When early stage on, you actually need to get the basics right. It will scale beautifully later if you get that right. But often people get wrapped into trying to sell products to people that don't want that product, and they then get into the spiral of having to fight and eventually fail. And there is far too much failure out there, which is another reason why the accelerator and incubator models that are existing, and I'm sure will be prevalent here soon, that's what it'll be all about. Failure, gosh, that's a miserable word, isn't it? We've got to change that word, but you need to fail. You know, success is a very poor learner. Failure is a fantastic learner. I've had my proverbial backside kicked by failure dozens of times, thousands of times. We need to think of failure as part of how we progress. Failure is actually crucial to developing. I had a great meeting with the Sprout guys yesterday, and they said they do exactly the same thing. Fail as quickly as you can. In my words, fail fast, and you fail early, you'll fail affordably. That means you don't lose your shirt, you can keep in business. And that's a crucial part. But failure will then teach you what does work, because you can back and go forward again. Here's a quick true story of a failure that turned into a success. It's a brand that I'm worked with. They came to us with a really exciting granola product. It's a make your own home granola product. Basically, you mix, toast, and eat. It's like eating a hot, fresh donut. It's a delicious product. But it didn't sell. well, it didn't sell any volume, and that's what you've got to do. It didn't cut through. It didn't get that repeat sale. It was too treaty. It was too occasional. And what they did as they hit the marketplace, they learned, and they discovered what people were talking about, the real issues that people were worried about, and why they eat a high carbohydrate type of meal in the morning, and bear in mind carbohydrates are a bit of a dirty word to some people, was that they needed to think differently. And one of the things they learnt, going from that range, was that they needed to pivot. A pivot means you stay with part of your product, but also you change to another. And that means, in this case, they discovered that gut health was far more interesting than a premium make-at-home meal. And then they developed a recipe that had the highest fibre, the lowest sugar, therefore the best gut health granola in the UK. And that's been a very successful business. Okay, so I'm quickly going, I'm conscious of time. So one of the things we've done, we get thousands of applicants, have analysed over the last 2 years 5,000 products that represent all the new early stage people that are startups that are trying to cut through and scale. Okay, the people that we're talking about are the interesting, if you like, the new future brands. We analysed over 5,000 products and looked at them in various different ways, particularly in two areas we're going to look at now. One of which is ingredients, the other is attributes. So with ingredients, comparing last year and the year before, what changes are there and how can that perhaps influence your thinking? So what we saw is that actually fruit juices, so we're okay over there with your fruit juice, Cameron, was actually #1 year after year, both years running. But then we've seen some other changes, new things coming in, like turmeric has suddenly become very trendy. And we need to be clear about why it's been trendy, and maybe its function is a big deal, or maybe its function is symbolic. So just got to be careful of some of these things. But then we see some changes in cold brew coming up more, but maybe other things are staying still. So we can get this data to you afterwards. It's probably hard to see back there. But the point is, there's some big changes in what people are using. And you've got to be agile about that. And part of the startup fail and pivot thinking is that you are agile and you move quickly and move forward. And that flexibility is very important. So we'll keep going. So that's comparison year on year. And there's some big changes. You know, vegan has come up from absolute nowhere, which we'll see next in the attributes, which is different to an ingredient. An attribute is actually a value. It's in the way that we've got free from is a value, whereas an ingredient is physically something in it. So we saw veganism come up from 0. It was something like 53rd most frequently used word, and now it's in the top. Is that 4th? Huge. Will it be there in a year's time? Will it be #1 next year? This year? I don't know. But interestingly, healthier as a word is declining. Why is that? Well, what's actually happening is that using more specific ways. It's a bit like word natural. It's pretty useless. It's actually there's no legal framework around it. It could mean anything. You know, it's healthy to drink water, but it's not so healthy to drown in water. You know, so the key. I like that one. Anyway, but the bottom line is things are changing and things are evolving. Things get more complex and they fragment. So healthier now has been expressed by forms of describing a product in a more specific way. Then does that, because that's resonating, because people understand the detail of, well, I think it's healthy. Well, why is it healthy? You know, why is that cherry juice good for me? Really, why is it good for me? I'm not picking on you, Cameron. Sorry, it's a great product. But there's other things that are changing. Dairy-free, okay? And there's not good news for a lot of people. These are the trendy new products coming out. It doesn't mean to say that dairy's going to go or meat's going to stop, but it is changing. And we have to change with it. So yeah, healthier 2 years ago was the most #1 word used, and it's now fallen down to whatever that is, 8th, 9th. Now that's important to know that. So the bottom line here is, how do we create a future innovative product? Okay, what are people really looking for? And I talk about mood foods because, you know, what you're going to eat tonight, hopefully it doesn't make you miserable, right? I want to be in a good mood when we eat food. It's a delicious thing. The whole point of food business is to persuade people to be engaged and then love it and buy it again. So that's a positive thing, right? So what we're going to think about is those, if we're going to persuade people, there's all the different trendy new things that are coming through. We'll flick through because of time and make sure we're on the right ones. But is there a formula you can put forward? Well, I think there is. And you can fit this into what you're doing. We call it the product selection triangle. In other words, what the supermarkets in the UK, and I'm sure this will be the case everywhere else around the world, of the interesting end, the innovative end, the extraordinary end of the marketplace, are looking at one of these 3 areas. At least one, if not 2, if not all 3. So if you're thinking about developing a food business, or you have a food business, you need to make sure these fit on this triangle. I prefer to call it a love triangle because it's a lot more fun. So we break this down into what does the heart mean? Well, it's about love. It is genuinely about that relationship. But you can have a relationship in lots of different ways. It could be with your loved one, or it could be with your family, your community. And all of it's about a form of a connection, some form of belonging. Purpose is important. You saw with True that they have a purpose for gut health. They want to fix the lack of fibre in our diets. They're on a mission. Good word that was used earlier on about mission. It was very, very relevant because with changing how we eat protein drink, that's a mission. That's about changing things. You need to persuade people to think differently. Doing good is key. You could perhaps give back in some way. And of course, all of this needs to be sustainable. These are not options. These are things that you wire into your whole way of working. Provenance is interesting. I used this bad joke last night, but my dustbin is locally produced, right? It's still garbage. All right? It's got to be about why it's in that provenance. And you've got this by the bucket load here. You're sitting on an absolute goldmine of amazing provenance. So get that story across. Craft skills, you've also got that. So what are the craft skills? What makes it really actually simple and beautifully eloquent, which is what you can do. And then history. Don't be nostalgic, but talk about history. Nostalgic can only go one way. History is a bedrock for the future. So we've got a love triangle here of good mood food. Something that can really bring into what you're doing. Here's some examples. You see purpose is True. You can see True granola there. There's other products there. All of them have chosen something that gives them a purpose. It's a very compelling reason to stay on and buy. Heart and places, when we combine two of the triangle, and that's an example there where Jackpot is a peanut butter, and they've used, for instance, two things there to put together, as in the heart, the community of where it's and where it's from, both things together. There's actually a whole range of brands that you can think about that. Purpose and heart, the same direction, and then all three of those, and you can look at those up after. We can get a copy of this and just check those out and see what they're doing about that. So what we're trying to create here, if you're going to be innovative and be interesting, is about good mood food. Get that smiley face going. 3 things to remember, if you can remember anything from today, is the accelerator incubator model that it's coming here, it's happening here, and it's going to really grow here, is that collaboration pays. Working together is far better and quicker way to cut through and win than doing it on your own. Start with one customer. Don't try and beat too many customers too quickly. Grow very slowly. I call it narrowcasting, not broadcasting. Find one customer, learn what they think about it, get your backside kicked, fail quickly, and then do it again. Do it affordably, most importantly. And don't forget the love triangle, because that'll feed your imagination and also feed your imagination of your customers, and it'll give you a long-term relationship with your buyers. Thank you, Cedar, for this wonderful opportunity to be here. It's an honor to be here. And thank you, Agmart, for sponsoring my flights and my accommodation here. It's been a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm not actually going to get too involved with anything more than other than get on with the questions, because I'm pretty sure that between the 3 of them, they'll have promoted quite a lot of thought in this room. So if we could crack on into the Slido, and we'll run through those as we're able to. I'm going to come and sit over here. You told me it's all to form if I don't. So hopefully I can read some of these things. There you go. John, I'll give you this, or before I pass the microphone, please. John, justify growing crickets indoors in controlled environments when our consumers and communities are demanding we stop cage eggs and eliminating big stalls?
It's a really good question. Insects, I guess, if you're looking at the freedom for animals to express their own behaviours, crickets live in little holes in the ground. You give them a large space indoors, they're actually in a better place. But there's definitely an argument about the naturalness of it. But I guess the overwhelming positive for me is the enormous win in density of protein in terms of resource use and land use and water use that I think for a lot of people would overcome that.
And if you continue, John, how does the cricket protein compare to beef?
Yeah, another great question. So cricket protein is actually a complete protein. It contains all the essential amino acids, so it's very comparable to the likes of beef and lamb.
Pass the microphone to the ask the question about that. Are there other Maori concepts you can use that are beneficial to agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about three things: vitalism, humanism, and reciprocity. And they are all, concepts that have grounded our people in ensuring our survival and our ability to thrive on this land. Really hard to break down in one sentence, but it's about remembering your relationship in the world and remembering that, in our world, we are related to the very plant foods that we are creating, so we treat them exactly like we would other things that we are related to, similar to what Cameron was saying around the connection with the animals on the farm. But yeah, those are three concepts that I believe are beneficial.
With the rise of veganism in the UK, how are traditional New Zealand export products like lamb going to excite customers to keep buying?
Oh, nice one. Thank you. The interesting thing here is that veganism has been labelled to cover an awful lot of places. I was at a dinner, and she was about 24, and she was getting some food, and she said it has to be vegan. I said, okay, so you're vegan? She said, yes. I said, well, actually, no, I'm not vegan. I'm an environmentalist, really, but I'm still a vegan. I said, well, what are you? Are you vegan at the weekend, or is it just during the week? What's going on here? And I think the truth is, it's a label for 100% plant eating more than anything else. And actually, we're seeing a switch from vegan labelling to 100% plant, including drinks and in actual all kinds of snacks or meals. And that's resonating with a lot of people in a big way. That's the first question. So there's going to be less meat in fact. When I do choose to eat meat, do I choose to eat New Zealand meat, lamb in this particular example, or something else? And I believe that even the people that are much harder up will still eventually start to buy meat because of the story and the trust and the relationship they have with the meat producer. And I'm afraid to say, New Zealand lamb is sold on price in the UK. There is no brand attribute other than price, and it goes head to head with UK-produced lamb, and if it's cheap, it gets bought, and that is a tragedy. And hopefully, this week will ignite the ability to start thinking about the real brand attributes around New Zealand and really get the message across about what you are all about. And then you'll start to have a product that people will buy, even when they're eating less meat.
Very good answer. Would you like to continue? Because there is actually a second one.
Okay.
Is the UK food startup scene changing? How do you continue to grow the market share?
True Canola, that brand I put up, they had approached by Lidl, one of the two nasty guys supposedly. It was 3 emails, 2 phone calls and 1 cheque to supply the whole chain for the whole of the UK. So I don't know. I think a retailer is just a medium to get through for a food producer, and that's why we need to think about it as online, in store, whoever it is. It doesn't matter. It's whatever works that gets through to the consumer that you're trying to target, be it direct to consumer, be it online through a distributor like Amazon or Ocado, or be it one of the big retailers. Don't worry about that. Worry about the supply chain and the cost of that supply chain to get through to the person you're trying to sell to, and then keep them as a customer.
Leonie, do you have a global aspiration for the products that you've got in?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have an export market scan going on right now, and certainly after hearing Rob's discussion and seeing that data, we want to get into the UK now, Rob. It's time. It's time for the populations who don't have access to the sorts of natural resources or ingredients that we have here. We absolutely have a duty that we want to share that with the world. Mm-hmm.
How much do you think that crickets will be in the current protein market in the future?
Well, I guess that's the million-dollar question. I raise sheep and beef, and I'm not losing any sleep over those markets being drastically impacted by crickets anytime soon. They are an alternative protein. I suspect they're going to always be a niche, but the question is how big will that niche be? And I think longer term, cricket protein, it's not cheap to produce. It has to be a high value niche, and it's going to be into sort of specific applications like health outcomes, that sort of thing.
Any one of you that consumers, research demonstrates that consumers are fickle now. Do you think now eating them will have any effect? Here we go. I can't see it. The research demonstrates that customers are fickle, trends come and go. How do we ensure we are agile enough to follow trends but provide economic security? Or Leo needs to start.
Oh, great. The model I talked about last night at the launch was about using beta testing as a concept for retailing. And we do that with Ocado in their incubator, which we created. So selling small and discovering how big that idea is, you don't know what it is until it actually hits the shelves or even into the internet. Amazon Marketplace is a good place to test as well, where you can actually split test to different people. You need to build on strength. The tech industry thinks and does that. It does it thousands of times, 24-hour sessions of understanding the metrics around what they're selling. We didn't used to do that in the food industry. We used to think in a silo, in a physical form, and launch something and hope somebody bought it under a common denominator way of thinking. We've got to flip that around and think like tech and launch quickly, fast, affordably, fail quickly, come back and do it again and keep going. Eventually that will hit that curve, that growth curve I showed at the end, when you get off the runway and you go whew, straight up. So that's my answer.
Sure, actually, what the answer might be to that question is goodie. And we're very aware that Kaitari at the moment we are riding a wave of plant-based foods and beverages. But what I feel has yet to really reach that potential is the value of indigenous Aotearoa Kaitari. We're just bringing that to the surface now, and there is much more depth to that. So yes, even though consumers are fickle, we believe that our knowledge and our practices will give us what we need.
Three words: diversity, diversity, diversity. Look at improving biodiversity because we understand that it's in the face of change. We don't know what the outcome is going to be in the future, but we know that there are patterns that we can put in place. Land use across a region, the more diverse we can be, the more resilience we've got, and sort of change.
Thank you very much. Look, I think it's probably time to take the break for lunch. We've got the opportunity to come back and ask these three further questions as we wrap up towards the end of the day. The lunch is going to be served in the gallery. You'll find more refreshments in here. Do please go and try and test the various products that our presenters have brought with them today. We're going to break for 45 minutes unless I'm given a call to bring you back even sooner. Go and enjoy, go and mix and mingle. But before you go, please do thank the presenters on stage for their contribution.
For impact purposes, isn't it? And taking off the tie saying, why am I wearing a Harcourt's tie when I'm with the professionals? You'll all remember me saying that, wouldn't you? Sweet. Okay, maybe you were all here, eh? Professionals as I. You know the worst thing? Being stuck in an economy class taxi with Melanie for 2.5 hours. Business class will be alright because some trolley dolly will walk up and down all the time and give you a drink or coffee or something like that, eh? But anyway, we're here. Right, what we're going to do is we're not going to lose any time because I'm just going to talk quicker, you're going to write quicker and everything's going to be fine. Okay? See? Good. We're going to go...
Welcome back, everybody.
1:30.
I hope you've enjoyed your lunch.
We're on the road about 5:30 today.
Hands up,
We're going to have afternoon tea.
everybody who tried everything that was there to taste, all the various...
5:30.
Yeah, right.
Tomorrow, which is
Literally that's probably half. What about the rest of you? You've all been determined to just partake and pick and choose a little, I see.
Where to? Wairarapa?
So I hope you all got the opportunity to also take a look at the AgResearch Expo and the Plant and Food pop-up and the Reddit display. They put those on for your benefit, and I hope you got a good chance to talk to them there.
Those that travel, 8 or 8:30.
What's that I can hear? Can you hear them? I can hear voices in my head, actually. Yeah, I can. That's
8? 8?
Sounds like somebody's on the phone somewhere. Just want to bring your attention back to Slido. We've been running some polls for the duration of the morning. Go online, fill them out. We'll take a quick look at them at the end and see what the consensus was. I know that we are creating there's one message per session. I'd like to acknowledge that we've got 3 high schools or colleges here today, with Mount Albert Grammar School down here, Palmerston North Girls High School towards the back, and I know we've got some representation from St Paul's Collegiate out of Hamilton. I'm expecting you guys to actually have some questions for us, either this session or some more for Slido for when we actually have the entire panel up here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have the third set of panel today, and then beyond that we're going to have a short break, go and recharge, get yourself a cup of tea, and then we'll sit down for that last so long, maybe as much as an hour, and we'll have a more generalised discussion and the opportunity for you to come from the floor to ask questions directly. Okay, so this third session this afternoon, having covered off who are our future feeders this morning, and then the game changers with what's new on the menu, we're now focusing on our view to 2050 with the question, food for who? With the world's population expected to reach almost 10 billion by 2050, what markets should New Zealand be targeting, and with what? The experts we've assembled will explore what consumer insights are telling us and what future skills and talent will be needed to meet that future demand. And first up, I'm delighted to introduce Mark Piper. He's the Director for Group Research and Development with Fonterra. He joined the New Zealand Dairy Group, which later merged with Fonterra, at 19 years old. And so he's told me he's actually been with the business now for 26 years, so you know exactly how old he is. You'll probably find his birth date. Mark has worked around the world in multiple roles, such as Regional Director Ingredients for the Americas, as well as stints roles in Japan and Korea. But he now calls Palmerston North home. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
First session after lunch is always the best, right? I'll keep an eye on everyone being awake. And it's always refreshing to know that I've been in the industry longer than all of these tables have been alive. So that's good. So look, it's an interesting question, food for who? And so I do want to sort of spend a little bit of time around what other consumers, some of the trends we've heard around this morning, some of them aren't new. And I'll possibly challenge one of the terminologies that has become a bit more in the common vernacular recently. So just to sort of put a few stats up, we've talked around the fact that there's going to be more people. You can read a whole bunch of different reports as to what that number is going to be, but I think everyone believes there will be more mouths to feed. I have 6 children, so I'm probably part of the problem, if I'm allowed to call it that. We've also got challenges around sustainability and around sort of supply, and I think Rebecca did a great job talking earlier around food waste. So if you read all the different stats that exist, you keep hearing this conversation of, we've got 7 billion people now, there's going to be 9 billion round numbers in the future. You don't have to pull your calculator out to understand how big a change that is, but then you keep hearing these numbers around somewhere between 40
If David picks up his iPad, it's because he's not checking his email, it's because he's actually asking questions on Slido, so he just wanted to make that plainly clear. So next up, we've got Tracy Phelps. She's responsible for the consumer and product insights with plant and food research. Tracy's a long and varied career in sensory and consumer research, helping guide product development based on consumer understanding. She's worked in academic and commercial environments in New Zealand, Australia and the UK, and recently conducted research in China to understand changing dietary behaviours of customers. Welcome, Tracy.
Thanks, Damien. Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people here after lunch, and special hello to Mount Albert Grammar. I don't know if you know this, but we're based right over your back fence, so maybe we can chat later. Right, moving on from more the global consumer, what I'm going to talk about today is focused in on a particular market, the Chinese market. So, again, I don't want to use the F word now. I was going to use it in my opening slide, but I'll just talk about this global trend towards more vegetarianism, veganism, plant-based, and maybe a bit of flexitarianism thrown in there. Anything like that for an organisation that's based around food and plants, of course, is going to raise our interest. So we've been quite busy in the last few years looking at how this trend's playing out. And of particular interest to New Zealand, of course, is the Chinese market. So in one of our one of our initial pieces of work, quite exploratory, we went out to China first and foremost to find out what Chinese people think around protein, and whether this global trend is how it might play out in this market, and how traditionally and culturally it might play out differently, and learn a bit more about that market and how this could move on. We've heard a lot of these facts already, and Rebecca put most of my slide up first thing this morning, and I've checked our facts and we're pretty much in alignment, so I won't go into too much detail about all of these. Enough to say though, New Zealand's social, environmental and economic well-being is pretty well linked to our ability to supply the rest of the planet with protein. And around 60% of that protein from primary resources that we export comes from animal-based protein. So that's our dairy and meat industries. But in these, as you can see, rapidly changing times, things are going to be changing. So it's really up to us in this room and in New Zealand industry to be mindful of these changes that are coming and how they might influence the way we work and the products we develop and market. So we all know now, we're going to have more people by 2050. So that population is going to be a lot bigger. But a lot of that growth is going to come from our developing countries. So not necessarily the countries we live in now that use the products that we're familiar with. Also, we've heard this already, at least 2/3 of that booming population are going to be living in urban areas. That means people are packing up their farms and they're moving into the city. So that's bringing with it challenges. There's going to be a lot of jobs that are non-agricultural. So who's going to be making our food for us in the future? As people move into the cities and take up sort of urbanised business jobs, the middle classes grow. With that, everyone's got a bit more money. So households are shifting away from those basic staples of starchy type foods that are cheap and readily available. They're looking more towards luxurious forms of protein, which is traditionally at the moment around meats and animal-based proteins. So the production of such foods are going to become more resource intensive, requiring more water, generating more emissions, all at a time where globally we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gases. It's sounding like quite a challenge. And with all of that, the demands as the intensity of these production systems grow, so does all of the ethical issues that come with these sorts of production systems. So a lot happening, and this is only scraping the surface. This is only the headlines of what's going on out there. So also, Rebecca, thank you very much for introducing this slide. Whilst we're scratching our heads and getting used to all of these big changes that are happening out there, our consumers are getting more sophisticated in their choices as well. So it wasn't so very long ago that when we were making choices around what we're going to eat, we were focusing on price, the taste and the availability or the convenience. But they're pretty much shelved now as more basic things. We all expect those things to be there. So with increasing affluence and easier access to information through internet and social media, consumers' demands are way beyond these basics now. Considerably more importance is placed on health and wellness through everything they eat, not just as a form of sustenance anymore. We're looking not medicine, food for medicine, or medicine for medicine, but food for our health and general well-being. Finding products that also align with personal, environmental, ethical and social values of the utmost importance to some. And this has usually been something we've always associated with the more affluent West. But as people in other countries and more developing nations are becoming more affluent, this is becoming a much more important criteria when people are selecting their foods. The last thing on my list there is safety, which, thank goodness for most of the people in this room, isn't actually one of these basic concerns we need to consider when we're thinking about products, because we've got strict regulations and products are produced ethically and safely in our market. But looking to China and how the people in that market particularly are making food choices, there's a lot of food around food authenticity and food safety in the market. There's a lot of counterfeit food scandals and so forth. If you were to wiki food scandals, you'd just get a huge list of hideous things that have happened in this market, and I'm sure we've all heard about one or other of them where people have been made ill or poisoned and so forth with food products. So we can't underplay this fear in the food market around safety. But with all these things in mind, I think the key thing, and this isn't just because I work in sensory, which I have done for a long time, is that despite needing to deliver on all of these criteria, that sensory delivery, that taste, that texture, that looking good still has to be there, still has to underline all of these criteria. So I'm going to jump to a bit of a précis now of the piece of research that we did in China. We did it in 2017, so we have moved on in the organisation and we're doing more work now. As I said, this was one of our initial exploratory pieces, just to get a bit of a snapshot about how things might play out in the market. It was an online survey we did. We went all the way across China, but we were focusing on what are called the Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, so the bigger cities, where our export products are more likely to land, and the people in those cities are going to be affluent enough to be spending money on export products. We spoke to 2,000 people, which I'm sure you're all thinking that's a drop in the ocean. There's 1.4 billion people living in China. But again, in order to get any sort of read, you have to start somewhere. And so we talked to 2,000 people to get an indicative read on what people are thinking there. So I'll take you through our headline learnings from this about how the global trend might play out, but more importantly also about the different cultural aspects we learned in the market. So we partnered with a company called AgResearch to conduct our study out in China, and as part of this partnership we had some access to some research that they'd already conducted, which was very convenient for us. Oh, this was meant to all feed in one at a time, so this is a bit of a messy slide. I'll try and take you through it. Essentially what Mintel did was conduct a study in China at 2 time points. They went to China in 2014 and asked people there about their life priorities. The precise question was, thinking about your goals for the next year, which of the following describe what you're hoping to achieve? So very high-level things. I'm hoping that you can read that. We've got healthier diet, exercise more, travel to near places, take better care of your appearance, get my household finances in order, spend more time with family, better work-life balance, home improvements, getting a new hobby, getting a new job, getting a new home. So we wanted to find out who said how these were prioritised across those 2 points in time. So the purple bars are 2017, 2014 was the green bar. So if we look at those, I've then ordered them in the rank. So the ones with a green box around them are all relating to health, appearance, exercise. So they, if you can see on the right-hand side where the rankings are, those green bars are all at 1st, 2nd and 4th place have stayed across the three years of the survey. So health and well-being is still very high on the agenda for Chinese people. And this is a recurring theme that we find in all the research we do in this market. And it's something to keep in mind because it does colour all the decisions that people are making, particularly around what food products they're going to buy. Interesting, the bars I've circled in yellow here, we see travelling to new places shooting up the ranking there. In 2014, that was people's 9th priority. but in 2017 it had shot up to 3rd place. Similarly, we see that getting household finances in order has swapped. Now, obviously, we're talking about a country that has increasing affluence, people moving into the middle classes, and that's just demonstrating how that's happening. And it has changed the priorities, because in the red boxes, sadly, we see spending time with family going from 3rd position right down to 6th, and working with this work-life balance also shooting down as people are more committed to furthering their careers and travelling and so forth. And if you keep these in mind, as I go through a few of the points from the report and from our study, you'll see how these are playing out. So first we asked people how they were actually changing their diet. Now, I was going to change this slide, but I haven't had the opportunity. At the top, before cooking more at home, was eat more fruit and vegetables. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But the first point on the slide, cooking more at home, was one that really piqued our interest. We weren't expecting to see that at all. But if you go back to the previous slide and you think about their interest in health and well-being, and they're losing this connection with family and so forth, that all of a sudden makes sense. People are trying to cook at home so they can control what they eat and manage their health. And they're also trying to grab that precious family time. Sadly, it's not a reality for many people in this market because they are commuting so far every day and they're having to buy food on the go for so many of their meals. When we looked at other sort of more varied changes, it very much mirrors what we're doing in more Western cultures, looking to reduce the same sort of issues that we've got. We wanted to ask specifically about this move around plant-based foods and so forth because that was the nature of our investigation. We found that there's very few people in the market who are purely vegan or vegetarian or show a big interest in going that way at all. And my next slide is going to explain a little bit more around the reason for that. It's quite a cultural difference between our own culture, perhaps. So there's an ingrained eating tradition in China that reaches back generations, and it relates this yin-yang, these balances that we see across a lot of Eastern cultures. And it's a balance where each meal needs to include the hun kai, which is some sort of a meat dish, alongside a su kai, which is not how you pronounce it, but I'm having a go. It's a plant dish. So there's an expectation that this meat and plant dishes will be present in every meal. They're not seen to substitute for each other, they're completely complementary. And so while most meals in China do have a meat component, it's very interesting to know that a whopping 60% of the protein that consumers in China ingest every day actually comes from plants. So only 40% of it's coming from meat. And that's completely the opposite. So America, for example, only 30% of protein comes from plants in their day-to-day diet. So this is already giving us a clue that if people are interested in eating more fruit and vegetable, but there's not much likelihood they're going to go completely that way. But what we did find when we asked them overtly, that 39% of them are planning, well, they are actively reducing the amount of meat that they eat in pursuit of their health and wellness goals. Naturally, being scientists, we wanted to drill deeper into that to understand a bit more. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got 60% of people indicating at the top there that they did want to eat more fruit and vegetables, and they're certainly doing that. Then as we pop down that chart on the left, the purple bars, we can see dairy and fish products have got a lot more interest. People are eating a lot more of those. It's quite a colossal increase of around 30% over a year, which is pretty good news for New Zealand industry because we produce really good dairy products and fish products. So that's a good news. If we move to the bottom of that chart, though, you can see that most of the meat reduction, 39% of people are reducing, but most of that is coming from this pork and the poultry to a lesser degree. So we wanted to understand that a bit more. So we leapt into the middle there and we asked people who are actually reducing their meat and their dairy, what fills that space on the plate? And I suppose it wasn't rocket science to find that in most of cases that was vegetables, but also just as equally high up there was this bean curd, mock meat, soybean, that sort of thing, which we've got to remember is very important in this culture. It's been a part of their diet and on their plates for over 2,000 years. So consumers in the market are reducing the meat that they eat, but they're not avoiding it completely. They're looking at changing that source of protein. So avoiding the pork and poultry perhaps, red meat's not too badly there, and our dairy and seafood and so forth is going up. So we want to understand a little bit more about that. So we looked into it a bit more, and we wanted to compare pork with fish, keeping in mind that pork is the product that's in the fastest decline in the animal-based protein market there, whilst fish is on the ascent. We asked them a list of attributes there, 3 of which were negative, and I've coloured those red, and we wanted to understand. Now, these are not nutritional comparisons. These are based purely on consumer perceptions of each of these different products. So the red bars relate to the naughties, the negatives. So we've got high calories, high in cholesterol, and contains saturated fats. So if you look at the pie chart, we've sort of averaged those out. And for the pork, you can see there's 66% of our profile for pork is negative reds. And on the other side for our fish, it's the opposite. So straight away, that's giving you a feel. So also on these charts, I've circled how much they associate each of these products with actual protein. And I think it's key to note here that it's not just about protein. These products have protein in them, but from a consumer's point of view, all these other things are weighing in on whether it's a good product they want more or less of. So really, when we look at that fingerprint, pork is seen to be positive in terms of providing long-lasting energy and protein, but those negatives are far outweighing the positives, hence the decline. Whereas fish, on the other side, those negatives, the fat, the cholesterol, and the calories are so much more a smaller part of that picture. And it's more about how the seafood and fish is adding texture and flavour and good sensory properties to a meal. It's helping with immunity and calcium and all those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily about the protein, it's about the entire makeup of the product. And considering what we know about how the Chinese economy is emerging and a lot more individuals are suddenly shifting into these white-collar, more affluent jobs, and their shift away from cheaper foods, they're looking for foods that aren't just about sustenance and filling them up. They want to be healthy and well and attractive and vibrant. They're earning more money, but they need to stay well to go to their little office job in Shanghai to pay the exorbitant rents and mortgages and so forth that they have to live in these urban environments. And some of them might even be having a second child now. They're allowed. So just to finish with, we wanted to understand, we spoke to people who said that they were already reducing their animal protein intake. So we wanted to delve a bit more into why. Why are you doing that? So again, re-emphasising what we've already seen, health and wellness is the headline there. Interestingly, what we see here, meat is much more of a bad guy compared to dairy. And in some of those earlier charts, we saw the Chinese consumers are very interested in dairy, and it does have all those green health credentials, a lot more so than meat at this point. So they're high up there. Food safety is an interesting one. People are starting to have concerns around food safety. That fear can't be played down at all in this market. As exporters to this market, I'm going to read this out to you because it's a very important point to make. As exporters to this market, we must establish a strong sensitivity to this fear and produce products through wholly transparent and safe processes to provide credentials and assurances that denote a safe and authentic food product. And I think New Zealand is a country that's trusted from people in this market through their travel and through Daigos and people who have sent products home and so forth. So it's important that we do communicate those credentials where we've got them. And it was just very interesting thing to see there that in terms of meat and dairy, though they're both animal-based proteins, people do think that meat's having a much bigger impact on the environment. Okay, thank you, that's me. I think I've probably gone well over time there by the way you're shuffling to the front of your seat. So I will answer any questions in the next section. Thanks.
I mean, that's tremendous research, tremendous insights, understanding a population and their approach to food. I'm hoping that we're doing that in every market. I'm hoping we've got teams working this out and then distilling it and then providing it back to the to our sector, because it's tremendous value in that. Right, straight into introducing our economist for the day. Shamabil Yaqub is an experienced economist, financial analyst and author. He currently balances a portfolio of activities, consulting through Sense Partners, a boutique economic consultancy. He also has various governance and advisory roles for firms and charities, and is a columnist for Fairfax and the Sunday Star Times. Shamabil.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And one of the other qualifications is I'm on the board of CEDA. That was the reason I was forced to come today. It's a real pleasure to be here. The topic is quite a big one, right? And I think we've heard a lot of very similar messages that have been coming through over the course of the day. So I might take the time to talk a little bit more about what does it mean for New Zealand and how do we retain social license to actually have an agriculture sector, so that you guys have an opportunity to work in them. And a lot of the things that we've heard about is how the world is going to need more food, right? We know there's population growth and da-di-da, but really the thing that worries the hell out of me is that the world is short of land and the world is short of water. Those are the two things that New Zealand has in abundance, and that's what gives us a competitive edge. It's our ability to produce that food. And again, we've heard we are not big enough to be able to feed the world. We can only feed a few. And we have to decide who those few are, at what price we sell it to them, and what impact it has on us. Yes, it's food. Yes, food gives life. But when we are using it as a business, the metric for success must be, are we creating good, quality, well-paid jobs for New Zealanders? And are we creating good profits for our farmers? If we're not doing those two things, we are fundamentally failing in our duty to have a sustainable agricultural sector. And you've heard today, all the way from the breakfast session today to now, that there's this ongoing conversation about value versus volume. I'm kind of sick of it. I'm really sick of it. I'm sick of it because nobody really understands what it means. When we talk about value, what we're talking about is good jobs, good wages, and good profits. It's not about more cows. It's not about more meat. It's not about more milk. It's not about more anything to do with the products. It's about what is the impact on the people in New Zealand. We must take a people-centric approach, otherwise nothing makes sense. And right now, because the conversation in agriculture is about how many cows we have, how many liters of milk we produce, and how many tons of cheese we've sold in China, the social license is simply not there. There is a huge tension in New Zealand where there is a division that's opening up between those who produce food, those who sell food, versus the rest of us who kind of go, well, it costs me a fortune to buy this milk and this meat. Why aren't you looking after the environment? Why aren't you creating good jobs? Why do you always whinge that you can't find people? There is something that's not right. And that is probably the biggest issue that we need to think about. The question about food for who is interesting, not so much in that we don't know where those markets are. We know exactly where they are. They're where we want them to be. It could be in the traditional markets that we've been in. You think about the UK, Rob's been talking about the UK market. We sell a generic commodity product in the UK. We have huge opportunities to actually sell different products at higher prices, at less volume. The customers are not necessarily different, but the products and the values are different. The growth in volumes are obviously coming from the emerging markets. The growth that's going to take place in terms of population, incomes, urbanization, all those things that we just heard from a previous speaker are absolutely true. And that means that there will be this relentless demand for products, but we can't and won't feed all of them. We have to decide who are those people that we can feed, want to feed. And there is a big culture shock that's coming to us, because the reality is the people we want to sell to, the future consumers, are very different from the people we have been feeding for the last 100 years. We have a very long history in agriculture, but our history is facing the Western world. The future is in the Eastern world. The culture is different, the expectations are different, and the products, services, and approaches must be different too. And conquering new markets will be hard because it is about us learning how to do agriculture in a different way. Not about making stuff, but about selling stuff. And when I talk about value versus volume, and I use this example all the time because I think it kind of gives you a sense of how it looks like in a very practical sense. New Zealand is in the number 1 or 2 in many categories of exports because we're a bloody good country when it comes to producing stuff. We're the #1 exporter of dairy. That's true, isn't it? By value. We're the #2 exporter of honey. Did you know that? The difference is, when it comes to quantities, New Zealand is still #1 when it comes to dairy, but New Zealand is really tiny when it comes to honey. We produce very little of the honey export market in the world, but the reason why we're so high up in the value chain is because the average price we get for our honey is $26 US. The global average is 4. We sell a product that is completely differentiated. We sell a product that people want. We sell a product that is so short in supply, and this is a joke, so you can feel free to laugh later on, but they sell more Manuka honey in Hong Kong than we produce in New Zealand, right? So there are some challenges for us in terms of identifying that there is a market that is really valuable, but there is also a risk if we don't protect what is ours, if we don't make sure that we create that traceability and ownership of the products and services that we have, we will be losing them out to other competitors that are out there. You compare it to dairy, dairy is a relatively generic product. It doesn't matter who's selling the stuff, everybody's selling at a relatively low price. It's around US $4 a kilo. Everybody's selling the same kind of stuff. It is not very differentiated. We are competing very hard to essentially get market share. We have to think very hard about, when we talk about agriculture, what is it that is going to give us future prosperity? And when we talk about value versus volume, it's not just about whether or not we're creating products that are getting great prices in world markets, but more important, like I said, whether or not those exports are creating to good jobs and good profits for the people who are here. The mark of success must always be local. It's always about the people who are involved. If you're not creating good jobs and good profits, don't talk to me about productivity. But we know that despite whatever has happened in terms of social license or whatever, the food sector and the agriculture sector is extraordinarily important in New Zealand in terms of our economic contribution, in terms of our global trade, in terms of our interaction with the rest of the world. The rest of the world sees us and deals with us as a food producer. So if you think about all the food that we produce, that makes up about 2/3 of all the exports that New Zealand has, right? This is a big deal. So when it comes to our outside interaction with the rest of the world, it is very much about what comes from the land and the sea. The food that we produce in New Zealand is very much a very big part of how we interact with the rest of the world. And this history, as you'll see over time, has always been very, very important. Even back in the days, especially since refrigeration came along, roughly about half of all our exports have been food products. But what we have managed to do within this period, if you think about the long history of agriculture in New Zealand, the mindset of the conversations that we've had is very much around how do we make this sector more productive, but the language and the narrative has been quite problematic. It's been very much about whether or not we've got more meat coming out of the land, whether we've got more milk coming out of the land, but we haven't talked about how do we do that and what impact does it have. And what you can see in this chart is the agriculture sector is incredibly productive in New Zealand. Right? When it comes to the technical ability to use our land to make more stuff, New Zealand is amazingly good at it. That's the blue line up there that you can see, which is labor productivity. So if you think about New Zealand as a whole, we are absolutely horrible when it comes to productivity, right? And there was a good big fight about it at the last election campaigns when Bill English told us there was no problem with productivity after he spent pretty much all of his career telling us there was a problem with productivity. Politicians, eh? The reason why I highlight this is because there is in fact a whole lot of good stuff that is going on in the agriculture sector. It's very good at adopting technology. We have amazing science that has already been adopted and adapted into our agriculture and primary sector that has led to the gains that we have seen over time. But there are some consequences that are catching up with us. When I think about the people aspect, one of the most common complaints we hear right across the country is the lack of labor. The lack of skills. These shortages are really starting to impact on business. And at the same time, we have an industry that has relatively low wages. Those two things don't add up. Either you have a shortage and you drive up wages to attract people, or you mechanize. There are no easy answers out of it. When we think about capital, we have become far more capital intensive. So the amount of technology that goes onto farms now is extraordinary. And I went to visit a dairy farm a couple of years ago, and it was just incredible how much machinery there was, right? And there was a lot of steel, to be fair, as well. And a very different picture from what I had seen in a dairy farm in the early 1990s. The amount of new capital that was required, the large size of these businesses was really quite different. So the way that we do business is becoming far more capital intensive, but it also means that we are faced with different types of risks, financial risks, for example. And it's hitting up against different priorities now. So when you think about the growth that we have seen in the agriculture sector, and in particular, I think the growth of the dairy sector, it's really kind of become very quite emotional because the increase in land use under dairy, particularly in very vulnerable land, has been politically and publicly quite problematic, right? When I'm driving around in Auckland, I can see stickers that say, Fonterra, stop shitting in our streams. This is because people are angry that there has been so much growth in dairying that they're fearful of the impact it has on their waterways and the pollution that can come with it. And for a long time, what we've seen is from the farming sector a denial that there is a problem. That's not good enough. The reality is when you farm, it is intensive. But there is a reason why we do it. And we have mitigation strategies in place. We do things to make sure we look after the environment and all of those bits and pieces. So we must also have a conversation about pollution and pricing, because at the moment, we like to hide and tell ourselves pretty little lies. You know, all those imageries that we have of New Zealand being a beautiful, pristine place, well, it's true to a certain extent, but we also have a lot of pollution. It's not good enough to simply say that we don't have it and people will trust you, because people don't. I worry that we're not taking a grown-up approach when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we will have to grow up, we have to own up, and we have to do better when it comes to water, intensity, and the amount of pollution that agriculture creates, because agriculture is intensive. That is where the science can help, that is where the way we do business can help, that is where we can do better as a community. When I think about the technology, and this is interesting because when you're in this region in particular, and I went to Lincoln University, which is the other place that has done a huge amount of science, and the CRIs that have done so much in terms of pasture management, crop management, animal husbandry, you name it. The technology has been very much a big part of agriculture in New Zealand. And the basic science is really important. And this morning, I don't know if any of you went to the ASB Perspective this morning, and we talked about, you know, commercializable science. And I'm in two minds about it. The reality of science is that we must have some basic research that's just about good ideas. You know, very smart people just finding stuff out. But we must also do the stuff in parallel, which is about commercialization and the practical problem solving that science can do so well. But it has to be both of those things, otherwise we'll never invent that new stuff that might otherwise disappear. But the biggest and the most important thing is that regardless of what we do, the duty for all of us is to think about how do we adopt and diffuse the best practices that are there, right? How can we be really quick at adopting the best practices when it comes to technology and science, so then our businesses are more productive, more efficient, lower impact, and more profitable. It is that that is going to give us the best impact. I think there are really two reasons why there is this growing division between the rural and urban sectors in New Zealand. And part of it is because the agriculture sector, even though it is quite profitable, it's quite big in terms of exports, it is actually a very small employer when it comes to the economy. So less than 8% of jobs are in the primary sector, including food processing, right? So 92% of all jobs in New Zealand are in non-food-based industries. So people don't actually have the connection to agriculture in any real or meaningful way. And if you're in Auckland, the closest you get is probably Amberley Farm. Those of you who are from Auckland will know that's the farm that's owned by the council, and they have a bit of a hobby farm with a few pigs and a few chickens. The other reason, of course, is far more fundamental. The reason is most of us live in cities. And this is not a new trend. When you look at the urbanization of New Zealand, it's going on for a century. The population, the rural population of New Zealand in the last 100 years has grown by 0. All of our population growth in the last 100 years has been about our urban centres, whether it's places like Palmerston North or Auckland or wherever else it might be. The reality is that we are diverging in terms of where the people live and where the farming sector is. The farming sector is still very land-based. It is still rooted in provincial New Zealand. but most people in New Zealand no longer travel to or have connections into provincial New Zealand. Even though in economic terms, we can see the supply chains crisscrossing the country, we can see the connections across the economy, but in people's minds, those connections are not there. What they see is the price of milk that they think is overpriced when they go to the supermarket. And they get really pissed off when they go to a holiday in Gold Coast and see that milk is sold for $1 a litre in Australia, but not in New Zealand. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why people kind of look at this stuff and go, I don't understand. Why is it that New Zealand makes so much food, but you can't feed us properly? Why is it that we are such a good producer of food, but the cost of food is so high in New Zealand? There's some real question marks in terms of how do we retain and earn a social license, earn and retain a social license when it comes to agriculture. I suspect the industry has been so focused on itself, on exporting, that it has forgotten that it requires the license from the rest of New Zealand to operate. And if it doesn't, you will see regulation creeping higher and becoming more intensive over time. And we have a very different environment out there. How many in this room expected Trump to win? Not you. There's always one pessimistic person. Realistic.
Living in the US.
Yeah. Anybody else? Is this people in, yeah, okay. Anyway, nobody expected it, right? 98% of the people didn't expect it. And the reason I talk about Trump is not because there is anything fundamentally wrong with what he's doing. This is what politicians do. They do crazy stuff. The reason I talk about Trump is because he is a symptom of how the world is sick and tired of the current economic model. Trump is not happening in isolation. We're seeing Brexit, we're seeing the rise of the far right, we're seeing the rise of authoritarianism around the world. What we're seeing is a dissatisfaction with the way the economy works and delivers for people. And when you look at what happened with Brexit, for example, the people who voted to leave Europe were very much people who lived in the provinces, people who are older, people who had less education, essentially the people who did not benefit from the economic growth of the last 30 years. These are the people who were actually undone by the growing divide between the urban and the rural centers, the inequalities between the rich and the poor. And the reason why it matters for us is because the way that we understand the world, the way that we think about selling our products, the way that we think about our government being able to create and open new markets for us is no longer going to happen. The world order is changing, has changed, and is not going to come back. The idea of global cooperation in the way that we had export markets and market access in the past is going to change. And that, I think, is going to play a very important part in the way that we think about agriculture, where we cannot think that just because we produce more stuff, we will find willing markets to place them. We have to think much harder about being selective and nurturing long-term relationships to know the customers that we will be selling our products to. Well, what is the view to 2050? Well, the reality is nobody knows. None of you expected Trump to happen, so none of you will expect what will come in 2050. But what we can do is we can choose, and we can be flexible. I think first we have to change the narrative when it comes to the industry from talking about volume or value. We have to talk about good jobs and good profits, because those are real things, those are human things that matter to New Zealanders. That's what matters. We have to think about how do we plan for the inputs that we're going to need. We have struggled and struggled to get people to work in our industry. It is no longer good enough to simply complain about it. We have to offer higher wages, we have to create long-term career opportunities if we are to get a sustainable industry that continues to meet the needs of our farmers. We have to be far more respectful of our land and the resources that we have and the pollution that we create. The reality is that industrial processes like agriculture will always have an impact. How do we make sure it's the lightest touch possible? We have to think continuously about the science that's possible. The adoption and the diffusion of the science is what gives us the advantage. That's why it's so great that we're hosting it here, because we've got all the CRIs and Massey here. But fundamentally, wind it all back to the idea of social license. When you're looking at to 2050, what we'll be allowed to do will be done by the license delivered by the public of New Zealand. If we don't have their approval, we will not be able to do what we want to do. We have to make sure that our industry creates good jobs and good wages and good working conditions. And most fundamentally, We must create a narrative for a sector that is sustainable in all its guises, in all its forms. Thank you.
Shamabil, thank you very much for that. I'm so pleased that you've challenged so many of the big issues and the status quo that we're currently experiencing. So on to the final speaker for the session, David Everett. Dr. Everett is the Science Impact Leader for Dairy Processing and Supply at AgResearch in New Zealand. He's 30 years of experience in research and teaching at universities across the globe, the CSIRO Federal Government Research Centre in Australia, and it's an industry-funded company. David is a fellow of the Riddit Institute, a National Centre of Research Excellence in New Zealand, and he's chair of the International Dairy Federation Standing Committee of Dairy Science and Technology. David.
So I can't walk very fast. I'm a card-carrying baby boomer. So we started out with the Generation Zs, then we went to the Ys, and then my ex-colleagues behind me, including the chair. And finally we end with an old person. So there we go. So let's see. It won't be what your the future of food won't be what your grandparents were eating back then. Who can remember the 1970s? Surely you folks do. In the frontier, right? 1970s. You would go to a restaurant. The restaurant would close at 9, so you have to go there early. You had a choice. You can have lamb chops, boiled carrots, and boiled peas. A glass of horrible wine, Blue Nun or something like that. And if you wanted olive oil for your bread, you have to go down to the pharmacy to buy earwax medicine. So that was the state of food back then. So it's very hard to predict where things are going. I mean, we know in hindsight that the food that we eat now is light years ahead of what people were eating 50 years ago. Let's think of some other technologies around, let's just say 60 years ago. Television. Now, when television was going to come in, it was going to kill two things. It was going to kill the radio industry, and it was going to kill the cinema industry. Now, of course, all three still coexist together. Think about DVDs. So we all used to go to the cinema. That was the only way you could watch a movie, unless you liked watching it on black and white TV with commercial breaks. And when DVDs came in, and what's the other disc that came in? Blu-ray, right, I've got one, so I should know what it is. When they came in, that was going to kill the cinema industry, because people were just going to stay at home. Well, they coexisted for a while with the cinema industry. DVDs are probably dying, because back then people didn't realize that what's going to be happening is we're going to be streaming things through broadband on our flat screen TVs. Words that probably people didn't understand 30 or 40 years ago. So looking in hindsight, it's very hard to predict where things are going to be in 2050. I have a third figure for the population of the world in 2050. My figure was 9.5 billion. That's when I looked it up. So what have we got? 9.5, 9.6, 9.7. So we'll take the average, which I think was yours, wasn't it? 9.6. So what is happening with world population? Well, it is growing, but it's growing at a slower rate. We've reached, people think we've reached peak oil. People have said we've reached peak cow in New Zealand. But going back 10, 20 years, we thought we would reach peak people around 2050, that it would peak at about 9.5 billion and then start to decline. Now, why would that be the case? Well, there's two things I can think of the top of my head. One is the China one-child policy, which they've recently relaxed a few years back. So we don't know where that's going to go with peak people in 2050. The other thing was that people need security in their lives. So they had lots and lots of children, because the children would look after the old folks in their old age. Now, with a rising wealth in the world, and I should also say there's a rising split in the distribution of the wealth, that is generating enough wealth that people have enough savings and enough security of food later in life that they need 6 to 10 children in the hope that 3 or 4 might survive to look after them. So that's something I think that we are heading towards. So we need to take that into account. I don't think we're going to be in a situation where the planet's going to be overrun with people. Of course, if you take a ridiculous example, the only way to clear the planet of people is to stop reproducing, and 120 years from now there'll be nobody left. So there we go. Current and future food trends. So what I'm going to do is come up with a bit of a brainstorming session here. These are some of the things that summarise what everybody else has said, and it just happened out that way that I was the last speaker, and so fits in quite nicely. So looking at the growing middle class, that's occurring in China. There's still a great uneven distribution of wealth in the world, but there is a growing middle class. If you look at some of the wealthier countries like the US, the middle class is decreasing. And we're creating a whole polarization in the wealth in places like the United States, where there are a lot of poor people and a lot of rich people. That's getting worse and worse as we go on. So that's something we need to consider. Personalized nutrition is something I hear a lot about. That is probably an extreme vision for the future, where we all have sensors attached to us and we can measure various marker compounds that come out of our body, out of our mouth, out of our skin, and then it tells us what kind of food we need to alleviate any illness that might be coming in the future, or how to make us healthier on a daily basis. So that's a difficult one, because of course then you have to have in 2050 9.5 billion types of personalized nutrition, which is going to take a lot of computing power and a lot of sensors. Maybe it will come, I don't know. The whole food is the whole story. This is something that's come about in the last 10 years or so, that the sum total of nutrients in a food is not the same as the nutrients we eat in a whole food product. So I can give you an example of that. If I gave you a piece of cheese which has X grams of cholesterol in it, that'd be a very big piece of cheese, and I gave you X grams of cholesterol in a spoon, which is the healthier one? The answer is not, they're both unhealthy, so don't even say that. The healthier option would be to consume the cheese. And we now know a lot more about the whole food story, that there are elements and compounds that are present in food products that interact with other components, such as with cholesterol, and that minimizes absorption into our gut system. So we didn't know that back then. So fat's come back. So I'll come back to that story about fat later on, but that's now known to not be as unhealthy as we once thought it was. Sustainable production, where people have been talking about that for a long time. And if you are making plant-based foods, if you are producing those, if you are producing animal-based foods, then you need to consider the sustainability issues surrounding both of them. And the issues will be different between the two. So of course, when the issues are different, the answer is always a balance. And that's what we need, I think. And that depends upon the climate in the part of the world you're living in, of course. Sustainable processing, that's not something that people talk a lot about, but that is, in order to make and I won't call it milk, let's just call it some plant-based food emulsion. They still call it milk in the US, although it's not illegal to do that. Not legal to do that. If you make that, or if you're milking a cow and bottling milk, what are the sustainability issues surrounding those two kinds of products? So those are things that we need to consider, because people are very concerned about sustainability for obvious reasons. The other one is, my final future food trend is cellular agriculture, and that is a really, really interesting area. Who's here? Just raise your hand if you've ever had a fake meat patty. So that's made from texturized vegetable protein. Okay, just keep your hands up real, real high. Okay, now I want you to put your hands down if you thought it tasted just great. Oh, so you didn't think it tasted great? Maybe there's a double negative in there. Just raise your hand if you think that the texturized vegetable protein tastes not as good as real beef. Okay, so just sprinkling a few people. I don't know, I've never tried it. I'm a beef-eating person myself, so I didn't see a real need to eat that. But that's a real developing area with products like Beyond Meat. It's been on the market. You can buy these products in supermarkets, particularly in California, which is where I spent the last 3 years. Ask me about Trump later. Those products are very easily found. There is another company in the US used to be called Moo-Free, M-U-U-F-R-I. So Moo-Free means free of cows, I guess, Moo-Free. They now call themselves Perfect Day, and they are in the business of producing basically a synthetic milk. So they are taking the genes that express actual bovine proteins and splicing them into yeast cells, and they are growing up in a reactor vessel all of the proteins that you need to make milk. Really interesting technology. It's not on the market because they haven't been able to do it yet. And there's a lot of complexity in milk, far, far more complexity in milk than there is in beef products. It's relatively easy to make a texturized vegetable beef analog, but to make milk, which looks very simple, is much more complicated. And to create those kind of protein structures that you find in milk, if you're interested, it's called the casein micelle, almost impossible with things like pea proteins. So that's a technological challenge, and I guess it will be solved at some time in the future. So look for that on the market. Oh, there's one more. This was very popular a while back, it probably still is, not so much amongst baby boomers, but the me generation, I'm not sure which generation that is. 24/7, 365, which basically means I want it now. And health for life. So these are all trends that are coming out, and I think the health for life one is probably the most recent one of those, that people are looking at not just the healthiness of the food they're consuming on a daily basis, but what's it going to do to me 30 years down the track? Is it going to create some horrible disease because I ate too many chips early on in life? Those are things that people are now thinking about more closely. So, challenges for the future, and what we have there is a chart, and I can't see it from this distance, so it is the countries there that are not coloured, so that's North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand's actually there, which is unusual. This is an American graph. So that those are the advanced countries, the ones that have a lot of wealth, so they're not part of this calculation here. But if you look at the colour coding, we've got red all the way down, orange, yellow, green, green again, and some kind of bluey purpley colour. This is the spectrum of the degree of alarmedness of climate change. So let's think about this. Where is climate change going to hit the hardest? And if you look at this graph, it's going to be places that are in the red colour. And what is that? Djibouti or Eritrea or something like that? I don't know. If you look down the next one, orange, you've got the central part of Africa here, you've got India, you've got some of these islands, the Southeast Asian islands. The ones that's going to have the least effect but are not advanced countries are ones like Brazil and Argentina, Russia, North Africa, and so forth. So in other words, it's going to hit the poorest people hardest. So, challenges, traceability and provenance. We need to know where our food came from. We need to know the whole chain. How is it produced, where it came from. So provenance is very important for things like wine, and not for food safety reasons, just for wine aficionado reasons. But for traceability, we need to know exactly the chain of events and the inputs that came into making a food product. And so that requires a digitization of food production, and it requires a lot of computing power and a lot of sensors. So that's something that's quite important. Food security and distribution channels, probably the main reason for the inequality of food is distribution and transportation channels. It's not that there's not enough food on the planet. There is enough food on the planet. We just don't distribute it particularly well. So we buy a lot of food and we throw a third of it away, one of the speakers said. Other countries, they're just scratching for food because they can't make it in their own country. And if they do happen to find some food on the market, then there's very little of it available and it may be expensive. So food security and distribution channels, I think, is going to be a huge topic, particularly food security in some of the poorer nations. And we need to watch that space very carefully for political reasons more than anything, I think. Climate change, of course, is happening. We just know that, all right? Unless you're Trump. And, sorry, I keep talking about Trump. I would stop talking about him. So climate change, that is going to happen. So there's going to be a change of agriculture. So you may end up making wine in Tasmania. You may end up growing bananas in Dunedin. We don't know where this is going. So we need to have, I think, an ability to be able to predict where that's going and to really watch out for that carefully to see what we need to do to mitigate some of the dangers that face us through climate change. Population increases due to 2050, and I still am hoping it's going to plateau with peak people at 2050. Well, we'll see. I'm going to make a prediction that it will peak at 2050. If there are any issues about that, I want you to send me a telex, and I will respond to that in 2050. Consumer knowledge, or lack thereof, and there are some horror stories about what consumers think about food. And what consumers think is almost like getting blown in the wind. Whatever happens to be on the TV news at night, whatever they read in the newspaper or the magazine. And when they look at us scientists, and we are always looking at the nuances of different aspects of the scientific production of food and the processing of food, and we seem to change our mind a lot, but we're not. We just come out with new evidence all the time, and we present that in what's called a disinterested fashion. And of course, the consumers say these scientists don't know what they're talking about because they change their mind every other week. So there's a bit of a split in the way of thinking of consumers and scientists when we talk about food. So consumer knowledge, and I have heard stories about people who consume smoothies because they are very much anti-dairy. So a friend of mine asked them, who runs a centre in the US, what do you put in your smoothie? Well, I put sort of fruit, and I put some peanut butter, which sounds absolutely appalling. I put some whey proteins in, and I blend it all up. So what do you think whey proteins are? Well, don't really know. They're plant-based, aren't they? No, they're not. So this is the kind of thinking that we need to combat, I think. And that's very difficult to do that because of the way that the opinions about food slosh back and forth depending upon what's being talked about on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. So allocation of land, water and other resources. Here we are worried about clean water, and so we should be. In California, where I spent the last 3 years running a research centre there, the dairy industry is worried about not clean water, they're just worried about water because there's not enough of it there. And the industry is increasing, there's a huge population increase, so the water that people need is just simply not there, it's getting less and less. As a result of that, we have reached, or I should say they have reached in California, peak milk production. It's now tailed down because there's just not enough water to go around. It's a highly intensive irrigated industry in California. It's silage-based supplement. There's very little pasture because of the dryness of the climate. So those are issues as well. We are very blessed, I think, in New Zealand to have an abundance of water, and we need to guard that. Digital big data, how to make sense of the data dump. So this ties back into sensors again. We need to be able to measure everything, but the trouble is it produces a data dump that we need to make sense of. So that's a difficulty, and that takes a lot of skills, I think, in modelling and interpretation of data. So this is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's just going to happen. So I've been told to finish on something that's provocative. So managed efficiency. I think efficiency is the enemy of innovation. Again, if you have a complaint about that, send me a telex. Efficiency is in the realm of commodity products. So when we are producing products in the leanest possible way for the lowest possible cost, the price goes up and down. It's a commodity price graph, up and down. How do we deal with that? Well, we need to get into the high value added space, and to do that, and this is coming back to fat again, you need to not get rid of the fat, you need to build the fat into your businesses. It's become a bit of a cliche that Google allow their customers, and I'll use this example anyway, allow their customers a day a week just to sit at home and experiment around and see what comes up. I think it's a really clever thing to do. Big companies can do that. Small companies have to do it. Startups just simply have to do that. But what are the middle companies doing? Are they doing that? Are they introducing innovation? Are they allowing people to have the freedom to make mistakes and develop new things, develop new ideas? I think that's really important for innovation. Right, so that is all I'm going to say, and I guess I'm going to sit down and I'll receive your faxes on my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, David, for articulating your predictions for the current and future trends, and also the challenges that they bring with it. Righto, quick fire round, because I know we're all going to get a cup of tea, so we're going to go for this. We've got 2 microphones here. We've got Slido. We've got some good questions arriving, so I'll sit down and we'll start. Is that one on? So you go for it. Help yourself to a microphone. All right, but the first question will be, we're talking a lot about alternatives to meat. What about alternatives to dairy? We've seen that data that indicates dairy-free is becoming more attractive. Mark?
Yeah, look, there was a comment made earlier around Perfect Day, probably a good place to start. So Perfect Day have a fantastic concept. We've had discussions with them in the past ourselves. As yet, they haven't been able to make it, and certainly haven't been able to make it economically. You have to believe it'll happen, and we want to be part of that discussion. So I think the comments we've made a couple of times today, it's not an or discussion, I think it's an and discussion. And so I think the world needs to realise that all of these things will exist, and consumers will then have choice to choose which part they want to be involved with. So I think from a Fonterra perspective, from a New Zealand dairy perspective, we need to be less afraid of it and more look at it as consumers will choose what they want to choose. So.
I don't think I can add anything else other than we're still at the very nascent phase of the synthetic proteins and synthetic products. We shouldn't be afraid of it. I think for New Zealand, it's all about saying, if these things are coming, can we be part of that wave that's coming? Do we want to ride it?
Either of you two? So, what would happen when cellular proteins are produced at a cheaper price than traditional sources then, if that's the future? What do you think is going to happen there?
Again, consumer preference, right? And it was an interesting comment, I think, Rebecca, from your talk this morning. I think you made it 2 or 3 times around things being cheaper, and you were talking about damaged fruit and vegetables at that stage. We can't have both. We can't have sustainability. You hear a lot of talk, and I'll talk milk for a second. You hear a lot of talk about glass milk bottles, right? They will be more expensive. And so consumers need to actually start voting with their wallets on different things. All of that, and I also struggle to call them plant milks, but all of the nut-flavoured waters are way more expensive. But consumers are buying them. Some consumers are buying them. That's fantastic. So I don't know that it's necessarily always a matter of whether something's cheaper or more expensive, better nutrition or worse nutrition. It's going to be a lot of personal preference. And look, I mean, to be honest, I think for if this population does go where it could go, we need alternate sources of food, and we need to make it more affordable. So again, back to Shamabel's point before, we kind of need to be part of that conversation, right?
I think the term they use now is nut juice. So that's in the US, it's kind of popular now. If you look at some of those products, they have to be fortified with sometimes protein and often calcium. The very little calcium is present in these products. So there's a lot of extra processing. This brings it into play a discussion about sustainability. You have to process it a lot more to make this nut juice. Whereas milk, you don't have to. And that's an issue that needs to be considered by consumers.
Interesting question. Do you think by 2050 you'll need a license to farm? Who's got a view on that? Who's got that future view?
Well, I think we should bloody well have one, because the reality is that you need a license to operate anything that's high impact, right? You need a license to drive your car. And we are operating a business that is of considerable value and considerable impact. So it may not be that you need a license to operate a business, but you need a license in terms of how much pollution and impact that you create and what sort of practices that you have in your business. But I don't think that's very different from any business, right? So if you have a manufacturing plant, for example, there are heaps of regulations that will dictate how you operate your plant. And Mark can tell us about, a dairy processing plant goes through a huge amount of regulatory oversight to make sure the food is safe and it's done in the proper way. So I think, we shouldn't be afraid that somehow just because there is regulation, it would be a bad thing. It might be that there are aspects of farming that will come into much greater regulatory scrutiny.
Right answer. And Tracy, anything to add? Absolutely. Not good. Very good. So if the urban population is increasing, is that decreasing the land area available to farming or not?
Only a little bit, because the reality is the density of people living in the urban cities is much higher than in the rural areas. But if you look at what's happening in places like Auckland or even the history of Wellington, we did a very good job of building over all the good horticultural land. Right? So at the moment, the biggest threat in Auckland is we're going to be building over the beautiful lands of Pukekohe. Right? It's a tragedy to think that we should be building houses in Pukekohe when we have single-level houses all over Ponsonby and Grey Lynn. So there are some big challenges, but that's about good regulation when it comes to land use planning. We can fit all of New Zealand in a very tiny space if we want to. You look at the population of Hong Kong and the size of Hong Kong. So not saying that we necessarily want to live like that, but we have a halfway house where we can have a lot more density. So I'm not sure that we are ready to have the conversation yet in New Zealand, but when it comes to land use planning, it's not grown up enough. In Palmerston North, they have made a decision to classify all their soils in Class A and Class B and protect the best soils. I think that's a fantastic move, and that's something that I want to see happening in more parts of New Zealand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this part of the presentation. We'll take a 10-minute break. I'll call you back as soon as I think we're able to kick on a bit. But at that point, we'll have all of the presenters on stage for the final Q&A session. I'm expecting you all to have either Slidoed it up or you're waiting to stand and talk to our panel here. Thank you very much. So we've got everybody assembled. What we're going to do is 30 minutes maximum, because we have schools that need to leave, we have people that need to take flights. And I'm just going to kick off, really. Some of these questions are obviously questions that we haven't answered from previous sessions, and they've now been brought to our attention. So we've got one here which says, we've only heard about the need to create well-paid job, good returns for the sector, and have socially responsible supply chain. Why? We've only heard that once. Why is that? They seem so important. Who would like to lead with that? Press it forward.
I've got a microphone so I can lead. I don't know if there's a specific reason it was only heard from once, possibly because it wasn't necessarily the topic that we all were talking to, but I think absolutely critical, right? We have to create value for our people, for our communities, but we also have to make sure we've got sustainable supply chains in there. So if it wasn't mentioned often, I doubt it because it was because it wasn't front of mind for everyone. It's very much front of mind. And I was actually thinking as that comment was made by Shamabil, who I see has escaped, that one of the things I spoke at a conference in Timaru last year, and one of the things that Fonterra got grief about was that we pay too well and other industries are struggling. We keep taking their staff. So I was thinking, I think that's a good problem to have, right? That seems like the right challenge.
I had a whole slide dedicated to this, but in the interest of time, very quickly skipped over it. But Kaitani was very much initiated with the need to create well-paid jobs in our region, and jobs that will be in our region ongoing. We, like I shared, are dominated by boom and bust industries. I live in Waverley, which is a small town, population just over 500. Waverley used to have a seabed mining outfit there, and now it's gone, and there is a sawmill that has just closed down. So being able to create good jobs for our people and in turn add well-being into their families is certainly a driver.
Thank you.
Just briefly, I'm not a big believer in trickle-down economics as a theory in general, but there is one place you can see it in action, and that's in rural communities. And it's self-evident that when farmers are doing well and retaining profits, they're spending that money in their communities as well, and that's creating spin-off effects in services and people that also work around those farms. So I think it's a really important point.
Going on from there, we've been talking about sort of agriculture, the education, encouraging young people to consider the career. I understand from a couple of members of the audience that I think there are 84 or 85 schools who have now got agricultural programs in line. What has the industry got to do itself to attract the students coming through, particularly if so many schools have actually got active programs? Who would like to have a go at that one? What would you think? What do you think that the sector needs to do to encourage you, to entice you, to give you some... But what do you think was missing?
Scholarships? I think you have to show them what the careers are. They think they're going to be in gumboots, they think it's going to be muddy, dirty, hard work, and it's not. It's very exciting, and they need to see what you're doing, and they don't know. And then you have to help them get there. Once you get them into your rural communities, you've got to support them and integrate them, because you're getting techies out there, but they need to feel part of it. And there has to be something interesting for those professionals young doing in those communities.
I teach at Mount Albert Grammar School, which is the second biggest secondary school in the country, which soon to be the largest. And we have a little tiny 8-hectare farm. One of the problems I get with my students is they don't know what it means to live, work in the country. So I work hard to try and take them out on field trips. And the other problem I know, that a lot of Auckland families, with their costs of living and everything, can't even countenance the idea of helping to support their student through a degree at Massey University or Lincoln University. So they're going to end up with a big debt, and they're still not convinced at the end of it they're going to get a big job. So when the student there said scholarship, she's not wrong.
I've worked in universities for part of my career, and science is stagnant in terms of the number of students coming in. It's considered to be too difficult, and everybody wants to study tourism, or if their parents have to say they were going to be doctors and lawyers. Look at it as a value proposition when they go to university. Cost me, what am I going to get out of it? Science is considered too hard. Work in food science departments, I've discovered there's a big discrepancy between what food science is in high school and what it is in university. When they were in high school, food science was number one. That's not going to encourage those people to go into food science, which is not making muffins.
What we're seeing with business schools and universities, they're creating incubating full-blown commercial arms of their business schools. They're free for brands, for a lot of support. The most fascinating thing I would suggest there is that actually a very high percentage, disproportionately more women, girls coming into that because they feel safer, they can learn in a more way, there's some fit with them as well. So actually gender gap is being massively helped by community-based training and opportunities to incubate into trades. I think that's really exciting.
I'll just say as well, I think it could be important as well, educating them that like they can be indirectly involved in the ag industry. Like, so they might be really interested in, say, biology, but because they don't really have much knowledge in agriculture, that they don't see how that can relate. Whereas if they get into the biology and then you can teach them and get them excited about the fact that they could develop a new cultivar that essentially, well, extreme example, is completely drought resistant, and that could completely change the way we farm. So I think that there's also other ways that you can incentivise people into it.
I guess like Miss would know where I'm going to come from this. I wouldn't be here at Massey if I A, didn't get a scholarship, and B, really didn't have a passion for this. I was going to do law and accounting. I would have eventually ended up in this industry, but wouldn't have thought about coming here if in year 13 I really didn't know of like got my mentors, Ian Proudfoot, Julia Jones, I met Tatua, went and did so many things, and I was like, you know what, maybe it is worth it. Maybe it is me working a couple of more hours and doing it, because it's not my parents, it's me being stubborn by saying, Dad, you made it without Granddad in this world, I'll make it without you. So that's how it goes. And as for MAG students as well as like Palmerston North girls as well, yeah, you don't really need to come into agriculture to like study agriculture to end up in agriculture. You could eventually study something, but have that in mind that I'm going to eventually come and help this industry out. So yeah.
Fabulous response, thank you very much. So if we move on slightly from that, we're looking at, according to your presentation, parts of the sector. So what does the panel think about that? What do you think these roles are going to have to be taken over by technology? What are people doing and what are people thinking in this respect? Who would like to have a go at that one?
One of my other hats is that I run a fabrication laboratory. It's the first in New Zealand in the rural sector. And we teach technology training to kids in Master and Warwick. So for us, a big focus on innovation and digital technology. Getting kids to think about life beyond the front gate. There isn't really anything to be worried about. We're going to be supplying a lot of labour with robotics and with automation. But that in itself opens up enormous opportunities for kids to start coding, to do the next Zero, the next Gallagher's, the next Truchies has to start somewhere. We've got everything to gain in the rural sector by embracing technology.
Teams never have ideas. Very good. Anybody else? Keep going. So do we have a labour shortage or do we have a retention issue? Or do we have both? What do we think? Qualified to answer perfectly.
I can have a go at some of it. So I think in the rural communities in particular, we have challenges of getting people, the right people into the roles. But I think the people, I guess, exist. There is a retention issue. I'm sure everyone probably younger than 30 is sitting there going, how the hell have you been in the same industry for 26 years? I can't possibly see a future where I'm in that same sort of area. If it makes you feel any better, neither could I when I joined. I started as a 3-month temporary worker. It wasn't until I'd been there for 6 years that I realised I was probably in dairy. And I've had different jobs every 3 years. The joys of a company our size is that I've been in IT, I've been in supply chain manufacturing, technical roles. I've run one of our largest regions, and I now run the first non-scientist to ever run research in the dairy industry for 92 years. So you can kind of do these things and you can move around within a job. So I think it's that we all have short attention spans, but you can actually have short attention spans within an industry, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone up here. We want people to have short attention spans and to challenge the status quo and to look at new things, because otherwise we'll just keep doing what we've always done.
I think just taking a tab from Shanubion's audio is that we're not offering meaningful employment and decent wages and something for people to wake up with purpose for.
There's a question which says, would urban agriculture have a place in future development? And I thought Rob might start this because he's well aware of the trends in the UK, in Europe and Cuba, conversations we've had over the last few years.
Interesting, I had spent a week going around London interviewing urban farmers, and I was horrified with the lack of profitability in that, and it seems to be that it's a tech business that's trying to find a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. But it was very interesting. But actually the most compelling thing that came out of it, I think it's really exciting, is that I see growing crops in the urban area as a kinesthetic way for the urban population to reconnect with agriculture. So by that I mean you physically are doing something, and the younger generations love doing stuff. And so although there are urban farms making money, but not many, most of them are highly subsidised through either some form of very cheap investment or the location where they're in. But actually the thought of a whole of 8 million people living in a town, and if you want a real example of this, Cuba is one, where they had to do that because they ran out of money from the Soviet Union in the 90s, where they started to grow things, and they actually changed how they did it. But we can do this in the form of letting the urban people understand about growing tomatoes or herbs or simple things when it comes to growing crops, horticulture, that lets them reconnect with it. And actually once you've grown something, you then feel much more bothered about where it comes from when you actually really buy it in the stores where you actually might go and get it. So I see it as a kinesthetic way to reconnect to rural life.
Thank you for that. Anybody else in regards to that question? The research demonstrates that consumers are fickle, trends come and go. How do we ensure we're agile enough to follow trends but provide economic security? Question. Consumers are fickle, trends come and go. How do we ensure we're agile enough to follow those trends but enough to provide that economic security behind it? Can anybody articulate it? See an answer to that one?
I do think that's a tough one, right? And I think that came off your presentation, Rob, where the things that were hot words one year weren't suddenly hot words the next year. And I think as consumers, this whole personalisation and personalised nutrition is challenging. So it's challenging for us as consumers, and it's challenging for us as producers. Because even just amongst all of us sitting up here, if we were to do a full gut microbiome check and DNA analysis and whatever the heck else, we'd all have something different, and the world just wouldn't be able to keep up with it. But I think the key is to try and understand what's the message that actually underlies those keywords. Cameron and I were sort of chatting, I guess, via writing earlier. Vegan is a big growth at the moment, but it's still actually a small percentage of the world. And there's a group of people that if you see something that has vegan on it, you straight away won't buy it. So is putting it on the label good or bad? The best example for me is I was in Owakuni with the family last year, and we choose to not eat gluten, not because we're celiacs, just a choice. And we went into a cafe and said to the lady, "Oh, do you have anything gluten-free?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, this whole cabinet." We're like, "Oh, none of it's labelled." She said, "When I labelled it, people stopped buying it. But as soon as I stopped labelled it, people, if they choose to be gluten-free, will ask for it, and I can tell them that all of this is because their father's celiacs." So it's an interesting time, and how much you buy into it, how you market it, I think is challenging for everyone.
Before we ask any more, I'm just going to prime you and ask you to think about asking a fellow panelist a question. I mean, if you've got a burning question for each other, please feel free to chip that in, because you are all right across the sector and internationally. I think there'll be some very interesting discussion in that space. Do you think it's going to be difficult to encourage more plant-based eating in New Zealand, where animal agriculture is such a big industry? So who's got the crystal ball around that one, and who's going to kick off?
I guess I can share something, given we have a plant-based product whirring around in the back there. Is it difficult to encourage more plant-based eating? I've certainly, in the experience of kaitahi, and when we brought kaitahi to market, and we released kaitahi through a campaign of food shows. We would have seen, I don't know, in excess of maybe 4,000 people over 3 different food shows. And all of the vibe, I guess, or the interaction was about the need to move toward plant-based eating. And these were mostly cities that we were campaigning in, whether that disconnect between understanding where food's coming from was a part of that conversation. I'm not sure, but in our experience, we haven't had to encourage people to consider it at all. In fact, people are welcoming our product.
I don't think it's such an issue in the fact that we grow a lot of animal. We're very big in animal agriculture because we export about 95% of what we grow anyway. And then what's left, a lot of people can't afford. So I don't really see it as being a difficulty encouraging more plant-based eating. And as Leonie's pointed out, it's if you create the products, people will buy them.
So if there is, if this trend continues, then how does our biggest exporting business, our biggest company, organisation respond to that, Mark? With where's that growth going to come from, and do you need a strategy to counter those trends?
To be honest, I think I've mentioned it earlier, we're embracing it, right? So we're actually better to be connected with it than sit there and go, dairy's better. We actually need to follow consumers. And so, again, I think it's an and discussion, not an or discussion. If you want to pull stats apart, vegan, flexitarian, whatever the heck you want to call them, percentage CAGR growths are outstripping everything by far. Volume growths are not. So there's still, every year, more dairy products consumed than there is alternate dairy products. But if we bury our heads in the sand and look at that, then we're actually going to go nowhere. So we're actually trying to look at how do these work together, how do we embrace it. We haven't started it yet, but we do have things like insect protein as well on our radar. It exists. It's not like a unicorn. Sorry if anyone believes in unicorns. I don't think they're real, except for the Scottish people who have it as their national animal. But it's real. It exists. So how do we actually embrace it and connect in with it?
Rob, have you got a challenging question for any one of us on this panel about what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've discussed after not being here for 18 years? And what's happened probably in that 18 years?
It's still it's great to hear this language about brands, but it's still very commodity focused, and that's because of the level of export I think John just mentioned. I can understand the logic behind that. I think a dynamic world where women and men, girls, boys from young age into your stage, Fatima, is as a woman that coming into this world, what type of work, you mentioned good and bad, okay, focusing on that, which is really good. I like that for lots of reasons. What sort of work do you want to do, and do you think your peers will want to do, that will make that sustainable, as in your interest in the sector?
I guess everyone has like different passion, I guess. I personally wanted to eventually enter this industry and go towards like MFAT, the governmental areas where I can sit actually make regulations and help the farmers and all, but that doesn't mean I didn't go out and get what actual farmers did. I did for a year last year on a farm to understand when I sit on the, I guess the government, I can make regulations that are actually going to help from a farmer's point of view, because it's easy to sit and make decisions, but we need to put it in a practical sense, that is it actually helping the people? So personally for me, I wanted to sit in that area, but for everyone else, I guess it depends on where their passion lies. Not everyone wants to become a farmer, not in the sense of like go out, work on a farm. There might be some who do want to do that, but not everyone. But I think everyone's going towards making decisions and being there with their tech, or whether it's with their, I don't know, commerce, but in those areas. So it's higher positions. I'm never going to say it's going to be lower positions. It'll be management in all those areas. I think the younger generation do want to sit where you guys are sitting right now, but at a younger age, I guess.
Every generation's one of the same, trust me.
There was one question I would like to answer that was on the thing about, it's about how long should it take to start a food business, if it should start it slow. What we do now in the UK is, and actually all over the world, is separate startups from scale-ups. So startups can happen immediately, it can happen tonight, and run for a period of time. There's no reason why you can't be profitable and actually make a living out of that very quickly. But you should focus on getting it right with your customers that are then repeat selling, and do your homework in that way. But then scale up is when you start to turn what we'd describe as the machine or the mechanics of a business that enables it to scale. And that also includes the human skills to be able to cope with a business that's scaling. So getting going, it is not slow, it is only instant, but scale up should be delayed until you've got the recipe right to turn the engine. It's no different to any form of mechanics where you want an operation to start to work through because you've got the people to scale with. So separate startup with scale up, and then you'll see a growth business that's sustainable, that will attract very capable people that we have here today.
And on that seems to be the most appropriate way to end the day, to be perfectly honest. I'd like you all to thank our panel for the large panel that we do have here. They've given their time. We've had some fantastic insight and some great conversation. If you're going to show your appreciation, I think, for them and the effort that they put in for us today. Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating day because we've heard from our future feeders, and we've had the science, and we've heard from those who are leading innovation in food production from end to end, and those that are working at the forefront of incorporating change through data and consumer insights, economics, and far more. I think if you take a look at those elements all visualised on those walls over there, you can see that she's a complex beast, our industry, in a complex world. We've got to thank Pepper for spending the day pulling that all together. I hope that is not lost but framed, because it's probably a blueprint in some respects, the mind map about what we all think and where we all want to go. A big thank you again to our sponsors, AgResearch, AgMart and Plant and Food Research. Once again, our speakers, I'd like to thank you, and those of you who supplied the delicious products today. I'm sure they were gratefully received. To our other exhibitors, the Reddit Institute, Tahi Spirulina and Plant and Food Research. And then finally you, the audience and the streamed audience, for taking the time to come and take part in these discussions. But what I would like to remind you, I would like to implore and make a difference for our sector. And I hope you actually stay now and mix and mingle for a few minutes. There is actually afternoon tea at the back, so please help yourself. There's more liquid, there's more food, there's more. I'll just stand up and say thank you very much for attending and look forward to next year. Thank you.